I always thought I'd see it coming the day my marriage ended. Instead, it happened while I was still wearing the hospital bracelet, my body aching from a loss that had hollowed me from the inside out. James packed his bags 2 days after I lost our baby, while I was still bleeding onto pads the size of small pillows. The doctor had called it a missed miscarriage. Our baby's heart had stopped beating 3 weeks before I even knew something was wrong. When James drove me to the emergency room at 2 a.m., my pajama pants soaked through with blood, he'd held my hand. But I saw something in his eyes even then. Relief, maybe. Something that should never be in a father's eyes when his child is dying. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," he said, zipping his suitcase closed. His voice was calm, like he was canceling dinner plans, not shattering my world. "I've been trying to find the right time to tell you, but 2 days after I lose our baby seemed perfect." My voice was raw from crying, from screaming into my pillow when he was at work. The grief was still so fresh that it felt like an open wound, bleeding and exposed. James had the decency to look ashamed, at least. He ran his hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that used to make my heart flutter. Now it made me want to scream. "It's not about the baby," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's been coming for a long time." I laughed, a hollow, broken sound. 3 years of marriage isn't a long time, James. "I'm sorry," he said, and for a second I thought he might change his mind. But then he picked up his suitcase and I knew. I've been staying for the wrong reasons. And now, there's no baby to stay for. The words tasted like poison. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I watched him walk out our front door, leaving me alone in our 3-bedroom house. The nursery next door was half-painted, a soft yellow that had taken us 4 trips to the hardware store to find. "Not too bright," I'd insisted. "Babies need calm colors." James had teased me about already being an overprotective mom. That night, I dragged myself into the shower, watching as the water at my feet turned pink, then clear. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, letting the hot water pound against my back until it ran cold. Only then did I remember that James had always been the one to pay the water bill. I cried until my chest hurt, until my head pounded, until I had nothing left. And then, when the tears finally stopped, I reached for my phone. 3 years ago, before our wedding, I'd made a decision that James had fought me on bitterly. It had almost ended our engagement, but I'd insisted, and eventually he'd given in, probably to shut me up, I realized now. I'd forgotten about it until this moment, but as I scrolled through my contacts, I found the name I was looking for. Eliza Morgan, financial advisor. "It seems extreme," James had argued back then. "We're getting married. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine." I'd smiled and kissed him. "It's just smart planning," I'd said. "My parents divorced when I was 8, and my mom ended up with nothing. I won't make her mistakes." What I hadn't told him was that I'd seen the text messages on his phone just 2 weeks before our wedding. Messages from a woman named Claire, with heart emojis and innuendos that made my stomach turn. I'd confronted him, and he'd sworn it was nothing, just harmless flirting with an ex that meant nothing. He'd cried, begged me to believe him, promised it would never happen again. I'd believed him, or at least I'd wanted to, but I'd still called Eliza the next day. Now, as I dialed her number, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Sarah." Her voice was warm, concerned. "It's been a while. Is everything okay?" "No," I said, my voice cracking. "Everything is very much not okay. My husband just left me." There was a pause. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, and I could hear her shifting, papers rustling. "Do you want to come in tomorrow? We should talk about your options." "Yes," I said, feeling a strange calm wash over me for the first time in days. "What time?" After I hung up, I wrapped myself in a blanket and walked slowly to the kitchen. The calendar on our refrigerator, my refrigerator now, I supposed, was still marked with my prenatal appointments. My next one would have been in 3 days. I'd be 16 weeks. We would have found out if our baby was a boy or a girl. With trembling fingers, I took down the calendar and dropped it in the trash. Then I opened the freezer and pulled out the pint of ice cream I'd been saving for a special occasion. As I dug my spoon into the chocolate chip cookie dough, I thought about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow and what Eliza would tell me. James had no idea what I'd set in motion 3 years ago, right before our wedding. And he had no idea what that meant for him now. Morning came with the harsh buzz of my alarm. I'd finally fallen asleep on the couch, the empty ice cream container on the floor beside me. My body felt like it had been run over, twice. Once from the miscarriage, once from the emotional devastation James had left in his wake. I showered again, as if I could wash away the past 3 days, and dressed carefully. Black pants, a gray sweater. Funeral clothes, I thought bitterly. Appropriate, since I was grieving 2 losses now. Eliza's office was in a sleek downtown building with views of the river. 3 years ago, when I'd first visited her, I'd been full of hope and excitement about my upcoming wedding, even as I harbored quiet doubts. Today I was just broken. "Sarah," Eliza said, rising from behind her desk when her assistant showed me in. She came around and hugged me, a gesture so unexpected that I nearly started crying again. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you," I said, taking the seat she offered. "I don't really know where to start." Eliza sat back down, folding her hands on the desk. "Why don't you tell me what happened? We can go from there." So I did. I told her about the miscarriage, about James leaving 2 days later, about his casual cruelty and his admission that he'd been staying for the wrong reasons. By the time I finished, my throat was raw, but my eyes remained dry. I had no tears left. "That's a lot to handle at once," Eliza said softly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not," I admitted. "I can barely function." But I remembered our arrangement, and I thought. I trailed off, not sure what I thought. Eliza nodded. "You did the right thing coming here. And yes, the postnuptial agreement you and James signed is still in effect." She pulled a file from her desk drawer. "Let me refresh your memory on the terms." As she began to read, the memory came flooding back. After I had found those messages on James's phone, I'd been too proud to call off the wedding, too afraid of the embarrassment, the waste of all that money and planning. But I'd been practical enough to protect myself. In the event of a dissolution of marriage initiated by James Wilson, regardless of duration of marriage, Sarah Wilson retains full ownership of the marital home at 1428 Maple Avenue, purchased primarily with her inheritance funds, Eliza read. Additionally, she is entitled to 50% of all retirement accounts, investments, and savings accumulated during the marriage. I remembered how James had rolled his eyes when we signed it. "This isn't necessary," he'd said, "but if it makes you happy, fine." Eliza continued reading, but I was stuck on that first part. The house, our house, my house now, had been purchased with money my grandmother had left me. We'd put it in a joint account for the down payment, and both our names were on the mortgage, but the bulk of the money had been mine. "What about the mortgage?" I asked, interrupting her. "Can I afford it on my own?" Eliza smiled, a small, satisfied smile. "That's the beauty of what we set up, Sarah. The agreement stipulates that James is responsible for half the mortgage payments until it's paid off or until you choose to sell the house. And given that it was your inheritance that made the purchase possible in the first place, a court is very likely to uphold that." I blinked. "So he still has to pay?" "Yes," Eliza said. "He still has to pay. And that's not all." She flipped to another page. "The agreement also specifies that any joint accounts be divided equally and that he continue to provide health insurance coverage for you through his employer for 1 year following separation, or until you secure your own coverage." A weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying suddenly lifted from my shoulders. I wouldn't lose my home. I wouldn't be financially ruined. James would still have to take responsibility, at least in the most practical of ways. "There's more," Eliza said, her expression turning somber. And this is where things get a bit complicated. My heart sank. Of course there was a catch. There was always a catch. 3 months ago, James came to see me, she said slowly, watching my face carefully. He wanted to discuss options for modifying the agreement. What? I felt like I'd been slapped. He came to you? My financial advisor. I told him I couldn't discuss your joint agreement without you present, Eliza assured me quickly. But he was persistent. He seemed to think that with a baby on the way, your priorities might have changed. My hand instinctively went to my stomach, now empty and aching. But why would he? And then it hit me. 3 months ago, around the time I'd gotten pregnant, James had been planning to leave even then. He'd wanted to modify our agreement before telling me, to protect himself. Did he say anything else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Eliza hesitated. He mentioned that he had some personal investments he wanted to ensure were protected. When I again explained I couldn't discuss this without you, he said he'd talk to you about setting up a meeting together. She looked at me questioningly. I'm guessing he never did. I shook my head, feeling numb. No, he never mentioned it. My mind was racing. Personal investments? What personal investments? We had joint savings, joint retirement accounts. As far as I knew, everything was shared. Unless. I need to see our bank statements, I said suddenly. Everything from the last year. Eliza looked surprised but nodded. Your agreement gives you full access to all financial records. If he's hiding assets, that's a serious problem. And given the terms of your post-nuptial agreement, it could be very costly for him. She turned to her computer and began typing. I can request those records immediately. In the meantime, though, I think we should discuss next steps. You'll need a good divorce attorney. Divorce, I repeated, the word strange in my mouth. Just a week ago, I'd been shopping for baby clothes. Now I was shopping for divorce lawyers. I know it's overwhelming, Eliza said gently, but from a financial perspective, you're in a much better position than most women in your situation. The agreement you insisted on signing was very smart, Sarah. It gives you a solid foundation to rebuild from. As I left Eliza's office an hour later, paperwork clutched in my hand and a list of recommended attorneys in my purse, I felt something unexpected stirring inside me. It wasn't happiness. I was still too broken for that. It wasn't even satisfaction, exactly. It was the faintest flicker of something like power. James had left me at my most vulnerable. He'd walked out when I was bleeding and grieving and afraid. He'd calculated the perfect moment to break me completely. What he hadn't calculated was what I had set in motion 3 years ago. What he hadn't known was that I had been preparing for this possibility from the very beginning. From the moment I'd seen those text messages and realized that the man I was about to marry might not be the man I thought he was. As I drove home, to my home, not our home, I realized something else. The doctor had called it a missed miscarriage. I had carried our dead baby for weeks without knowing it, going about my life thinking everything was fine when it wasn't. James had done the same thing to me with our marriage. I'd been carrying a dead relationship, not seeing the truth that was right in front of me. But unlike the miscarriage, this was something I could fight back against. This was something I could control. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment looking at the house. My house. The one place James couldn't take from me, thanks to what I'd set in motion 3 years ago. Inside, I walked straight to the half-painted nursery and stood in the doorway, looking at the soft yellow walls. Then I went to the hall closet and found what I was looking for, a roller brush and a can of paint. A different color, a rich, bold blue. I changed into old clothes, covered the floor with a drop cloth, and began to paint over the yellow. With each stroke, I felt a little stronger. With each dip of the roller, I reclaimed a little piece of my life. James had left me 2 days after my miscarriage. He had no idea what I'd already set in motion. and he had no idea what I was about to do next. By evening, the nursery walls were completely transformed. The soft yellow that had once represented hope was gone, covered by a bold cobalt blue that made the small room feel like a sanctuary instead of a reminder of loss. I stood in the center, paint-splattered and exhausted, but strangely at peace. My phone had been buzzing all day. James, my mother, my best friend Lindsay. I'd ignored them all. This day was for me, for reclaiming something that felt like control. When I finally checked my messages that night, there were 5 missed calls from James and a text that simply read, "We need to talk about the house." I laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. Of course, he'd already realized what my postnuptial agreement meant. He'd already calculated his losses. I didn't respond. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, my first since finding out I was pregnant, and took it to my bathtub. The hot water soothed my aching body, still recovering from the physical trauma of the miscarriage. The wine warmed me from the inside, dulling the edges of my grief, just enough to make it bearable. Tomorrow, I decided I would call one of the attorneys Eliza had recommended. Tomorrow, I would start the process of officially ending my marriage. Tonight, I would allow myself this small comfort. But as I settled into bed, my phone buzzed again. "James, I'm coming by tomorrow to get the rest of my things," the text read. "We should discuss how to handle the house. Maybe we can sell it and split the profits." I stared at the message, anger bubbling up inside me. He really had no idea. He thought he could walk away from our marriage and our home as easily as he'd walked away from me, from our baby. No, I typed back. Just that. One word. 3 dots appeared immediately. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, you're not coming by tomorrow. And no, we're not selling the house." Another immediate response. "Don't be difficult, Sarah. We both know we need to sort this out." My fingers flew across the screen. I sorted it out 3 years ago. Checked the postnuptial agreement. The house is mine, and you can send someone else for your things. I don't want to see you. There was a long pause before his next message appeared. "This is ridiculous. That agreement was just a formality. You can't seriously expect to keep the house." "I don't just expect it. It's legally mine, and you're still responsible for half the mortgage payments. Check with your lawyer if you don't believe me." This time the pause was even longer. I could almost see him, wherever he was staying, frantically Googling postnuptial agreements, maybe even digging through his files for a copy. Finally, "This isn't fair." I laughed again, a harsh sound in the quiet bedroom. "Neither is leaving your wife 2 days after she miscarries your child. I'll have boxes of your things on the porch on Friday. Don't come until after 6, when I won't be home." I turned off my phone before he could respond, unwilling to give him the last word. Then I curled up in our bed, my bed now, and slept more soundly than I had in days. The next morning, I called Patricia Winters, the first name on Eliza's list of recommended divorce attorneys. Her assistant scheduled me for an appointment that afternoon, and I spent the morning gathering all the financial documents I could find in the house. In James's home office, I found folders neatly labeled with our account information, tax returns, and investment statements. Everything seemed in order, organized with my husband's characteristic precision. But as I was about to close his desk drawer, something caught my eye. A bank statement from an account I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. First National Bank. Account holder, James Wilson. Balance, $42,756.32. I stared at the statement, dated just 3 weeks ago. An account in his name only with over $40,000. Money I'd known nothing about. I searched through the entire drawer, finding 6 months' worth of statements for this secret account. The balance had been growing steadily, with deposits of varying amounts every few weeks. The most recent statement showed a deposit of $5,000, just days before I discovered I was miscarrying. He'd been planning this, squirreling away money, preparing for his escape, possibly for months, certainly while I was pregnant. My hand went instinctively to my empty womb, a physical ache blooming there. I carefully photographed every statement with my phone, then placed them back exactly as I'd found them. Then I searched the rest of his office, looking for anything else he might have hidden from me. In a locked file cabinet that I opened with the spare key we kept in the kitchen junk drawer, I found something even worse. Printouts of emails between James and someone named Claire, the same Claire from the text messages I discovered before our wedding. Dozens of them, dating back over a year. The most recent was from just a week ago. "I can't wait to start our life together," Claire had written. "Just a little longer, and we won't have to hide anymore." James had replied, "Soon, I promise. There are just some practical matters to sort out first." Practical matters, like getting out of our postnuptial agreement, like hiding money where I couldn't reach it, like walking away from his pregnant wife. Only I wasn't pregnant anymore, which had apparently accelerated his timeline. I photographed these emails too, my vision blurring with tears of rage rather than sorrow. Then I locked everything away again and left his office, taking the evidence with me on my phone. Patricia Winters was nothing like I expected. In my mind, divorce attorneys were sharp-suited barracudas with predatory smiles. Patricia was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. But as our meeting progressed, I realized appearances were deceiving. Patricia might look like someone's grandmother, but her mind was razor-sharp. "The postnuptial agreement is extremely favorable to you," she said, reviewing the document Eliza had sent over. "And given the circumstances of your separation, a judge is very likely to enforce it strictly. What about the hidden account?" I asked, showing her the photos on my phone. "And the emails?" Patricia's expression hardened as she swiped through the images. "Financial deception during marriage is something judges take very seriously," she said. "As for the affair, assuming that's what these emails indicate, it doesn't affect the division of assets in a no-fault state like ours, but it does give us significant leverage in negotiations." "Negotiations?" I asked. "I thought the post-nuptial agreement was clear." "It is," Patricia said, "but men like your husband often try to fight these things, drag them out, make them more expensive and painful than they need to be." She leaned forward. "The evidence you've found gives us what we need to make him back down quickly. He won't want these emails becoming part of the public record." I hadn't thought of that. The idea that James's betrayal could become public knowledge, that his colleagues and friends might learn what he'd done. It gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now," Patricia said with a smile that reminded me more of a wolf than a grandmother, "we prepare to file for divorce. But first, we send your husband a letter outlining exactly what we know and what we expect." When I left Patricia's office, I felt lighter than I had in days. There was still a hollow ache where my baby should have been growing, still a rawness where my marriage had been torn away. But alongside the pain was something new, a sense of purpose, of righteous anger. I went straight from Patricia's office to my favorite cafe, a quiet place where James and I had never gone together. I ordered a chai latte and opened my laptop. It was time to take stock of my life, to figure out what came next. I'd worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm until 6 months ago, when I decided to go freelance. The flexibility had seemed perfect with a baby on the way. Now, I needed to rebuild my client base fast. I sent emails to former colleagues and clients, letting them know I was available for projects. I updated my portfolio website, removing any mention of my personal life or my married name. I created a new budget, calculating what I could afford on my own if James tried to fight the mortgage payments. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice someone approaching my table until a shadow fell across my screen. "Sarah." I looked up to see Claire. I recognized her immediately from her social media photos, which I'd obsessively stalked 3 years ago after finding those text messages. She was pretty in a delicate way, with long blonde hair and wide blue eyes. She looked nervous. "Claire," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, This is unexpected. She shifted from foot to foot. I saw you through the window. She gestured vaguely at the empty chair across from me. Can I sit? I should have said no. I should have told her to go to hell. Instead, I nodded. She slid into the seat, clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. Up close, I could see she was younger than me, maybe in her mid-20s. 7 years my junior. Young enough to be dazzled by a successful man like James, who at 35 was already a partner in his architectural firm. I'm sorry about the baby, she said after a moment of awkward silence. James told me. Rage flared so hot and sudden that for a moment I couldn't speak. James had told her about our baby, about my miscarriage. Of course he had. They'd probably discussed it together. How convenient the timing was. Did he also tell you he left me 2 days later? I asked, my voice like ice. Claire looked down at her coffee. He said things had been over between you for a long time. That you both knew it. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that made the man at the next table glance over in concern. That's news to me, especially since I was carrying what I thought was our very much wanted child until last week. Claire's face crumpled. He told me you were separated, she whispered, living apart, that the pregnancy was an accident, a last desperate attempt to save something that was already over. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too hot. The chai latte I'd been drinking soured in my stomach. We've been living together in our house, the house we bought together for our family, until literally 2 days after I miscarried, I said. So no, we weren't separated. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand, she said. He's been telling me for a year that your marriage was over in all but name, that he was just trying to find the right time to leave. He said, she broke off, shaking her head. Let me guess, I said. He said I was difficult, demanding, possibly unstable, that he was trying to be kind, to let me down gently. Claire nodded slowly, a tear spilling down her cheek. And he said your family had money, that you'd be fine, but that he was worried about how you'd react. My family does have money, I confirmed, which is why I insisted on a postnuptial agreement that he's now trying to get out of. I shook my head, disgusted. He's been lying to both of us, Claire. The only difference is I've figured it out. She was crying openly now, mascara tracking down her face. I've been waiting for him for so long, she said. I gave up so much. Other relationships, a job in Seattle. All because he promised we'd be together soon. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. She was young, and James was very convincing. I knew that better than anyone. Where is he staying now? I asked, unable to help myself. With me, Claire admitted. My apartment. He moved in on Sunday. Sunday, the day he'd walked out on me, leaving me alone with my grief and my empty womb. He'd gone straight from our house to her apartment. The timeline made me sick. Do you love him? I asked. Claire looked up, startled by the question. Yes, I think so. I did. She shook her head. I don't know anymore. If he could lie about this, then he could lie about anything, I finished for her. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women betrayed by the same man in different ways. I should go, Claire finally said, standing up. She hesitated, then added, I'm sorry, Sarah. I really didn't know. About the baby, about your marriage. Any of it. I believed her. The devastation on her face was too raw to be faked. It's not your fault, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. It's his. After she left, I sat for a long time letting my chai grow cold. Then I packed up my laptop and went home. When I pulled into my driveway, James's car was parked in front of the house. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'd told him not to come, to send someone else for his things. For a moment, I considered driving away, going to a hotel, avoiding the confrontation. But this was my home. I wasn't going to be driven from it. I found him in his office, frantically going through the locked file cabinet where I had discovered the emails. He whirled around when I entered, guilt written all over his face. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. "I told you to send someone else." "Sarah," he said, his voice placating, "we need to talk. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." "What thing exactly?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Our marriage? Your affair? Or the fact that I know about your secret bank account with $40,000 in it?" His face went pale. "You've been going through my things." "In my house? Yes, I have." I stepped further into the room. "Just like you're going through that cabinet right now, looking for the evidence of your affair with Claire. It's not there anymore, by the way." James swallowed hard. "Look, I know you're upset. The timing was terrible, I admit that. But this marriage hasn't been working for either of us for a long time." "Save it," I said. "I've already met with a divorce attorney. You'll be hearing from her soon. And yes, she knows about the postnuptial agreement, the hidden bank account, and Claire. All of it." He took a step toward me, his expression hardening. "You're really going to try to take me for everything? After all we've been through?" "I'm not taking you for anything," I said. "I'm keeping what's legally mine. And yes, you're still responsible for half the mortgage on this house. You signed the agreement." "That was different," he protested. "We were about to get married. You were making me jump through hoops because of a few meaningless text messages." "Meaningless?" I repeated. "You've been having an affair with the same woman for at least a year, possibly longer. You were planning to leave me. You hid money from me. And then you walked out 2 days after I lost our baby." My voice broke on the last words, but I forced myself to continue. "There's nothing meaningless about any of that, James." He had the decency to look ashamed, at least momentarily, but then his expression hardened again. "I won't be bullied into an unfair settlement. If you push this, I'll fight it." I smiled, knowing it didn't reach my eyes. "Go ahead. Fight it. Let's see how your firm feels about a partner who cheats on his pregnant wife and abandons her days after a miscarriage. Let's see how your clients react to that kind of character." James blanched. His architectural firm was conservative, family-oriented. They valued their reputation above all else. "You wouldn't," he said. "I would," I assured him. "You've left me with nothing to lose, James. Nothing except this house and my dignity. So yes, I'll fight to keep both." We stared at each other across the room that had once been his office in our home. I saw something shift in his eyes, a calculation, a realization that he might not win this battle. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Exactly what the postnuptial agreement lays out," I said. "The house remains mine. You continue to pay half the mortgage. We split all accounts that are in both our names. And you declare that secret account as a marital asset to be divided." He flinched at the mention of the secret account. "And if I agree to all that?" "Then we can handle this quietly," I said. "No public accusations, no messy court battle. A clean break." James was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. I could practically see the gears turning in his mind, calculating the financial hit against the potential damage to his reputation. "Fine," he said at last. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours." "Good," said. "Now please get your things and leave. And James." I paused, making sure I had his full attention. "I talked to Claire today. She knows everything now." The color drained from his face. "You what?" "She approached me at a cafe," I explained. "She was under the impression that we'd been separated for some time, that our pregnancy was an accident. I set her straight." James ran a hand through his hair. That once familiar gesture I'd loved, now just an irritating reminder of the man I'd thought I knew. "You had no right," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "I had every right," I corrected him. "You've been lying to both of us. The difference is now we both know it." I left him there, surrounded by the remnants of his deception, and went upstairs to the room that used to be our nursery. The blue paint had dried, transforming the space completely. I sat in the middle of the empty room and listened to James moving around downstairs, gathering his possessions, the sounds of his departure from my life. When he was finally gone, his car pulling away from the curb for the last time, I felt something unexpected, relief. The grief was still there for my baby, for the marriage I'd thought I had, but alongside it was a sense of liberation, of possibility. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been putting off. I called my mother. "Sarah," she answered immediately. "Are you okay? I've been so worried." "No," I said honestly. "I'm not okay, but I think I will be." "What do you need?" she asked. No judgment, no questions, just support. "Can you come stay with me for a few days?" I asked. "I don't want to be alone right now." "I'll be there in the morning," she promised. After we hung up, I went back to the blue room that would never be a nursery, at least not for the baby I'd lost. I sat on the floor and let myself cry, really cry, for everything that had happened. For my baby, for my marriage, for the life I'd thought I was building. But as the tears finally subsided, I realized something important. James had left me at my most vulnerable, thinking he was leaving me with nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I was still here in my house, with my strength, my intellect, my resilience. What I'd set in motion 3 years ago had protected me financially, but what I would set in motion now would rebuild me completely. A new career, new friendships, a new life that didn't include a man who could walk away from me when I needed him most. As night fell, I made myself dinner, just a simple pasta, but the first real food I'd cooked since the miscarriage. I opened a window, letting in the spring air. I played music that James had always hated. Small acts of reclamation, small steps toward healing. James had left me 2 days after my miscarriage, thinking he was leaving me shattered and powerless. He had no idea what I'd already set in motion. Not just the legal protections that would secure my future, but the strength I didn't know I had until I needed it. The strength that would carry me forward, one day at a time, into whatever came next.